At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality walking shoes, which might lead to another discovery.
40,000 steps, baby. Who's on top now, Karen?
You've taken the office step challenge a step too far. Don't worry, though. Sierra also has yoga gear. It might be a good place to find your zen. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
This message is brought to you by Apple Card. Apple Card takes privacy seriously. It's your card, your info, your business. So if your credit card isn't Apple Card, maybe it should be. Subject to credit approval. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA Salt Lake City branch. Terms and more at applecard.com.
I'm going to start this episode by telling a story about myself. It makes me a little uncomfortable. I was trained to keep the focus on other people. But here we go. 3 days before Christmas in 2023, I was diagnosed with early-stage lung cancer. I was 48 with a 3-year-old son. I'm not a smoker, I had no risk factors, and my tumor was found accidentally on an unrelated scan. I was stunned. Honestly, I am still wrapping my head around it. And I'm part of a growing group of people, mostly women and non-smokers, who are being diagnosed with lung cancer. Last January, I had a successful surgery to remove the tumor and a chunk of my left lung. Now I am on a drug. It's called Tagrisso, or osimertinib, and it targets a mutation on one gene of my tumor, the EGFR gene. In the lung cancer community, osimertinib is a game changer. When results from one of the clinical trials were announced at a big oncology conference, the room erupted in applause.
The room, had a standing ovation afterwards, just showing, what a transformational drug this was for patients with EGFR positive lung cancer, patients like yourself.
That's Angus Chen, who reports on cancer for Stat News.
It is incredible. I think it is one of these examples of progress in cancer medicine, where you start with something that begins, a long, long time ago with basic science discoveries, and then slowly, over decades, really, it gets moved more and more into the clinic and through next generation EGFR targeting therapies, to the point where we have this very selective, a very effective medication that you can take and continue taking, in the adjuvant setting after surgery, and makes a big difference in survival.
Trial data showed that for people with early-stage EGFR-positive lung cancers, Tagrisso reduced the risk of death by 51% compared to placebo. I wanted to ask Angus about my cancer and my medication because it feels like such a demonstrable success story for cancer research and cancer care. I'm not trying to draw a straight line here because that would be glib and I think not true to the science. But the story of Tagrisso does make me think a lot about the state of cancer research right now, which feels uncertain. Do you think that's a fair characterization?
I think it is. I think, you can look at almost any of the breakthroughs that cancer research has had in, the last 30 years or more, and really almost going back to World War II, right? Where the American government kind of invested heavily into the scientific ecosystem here in this country and the scientific industry and engine sort of biomedical discovery through our universities and academic medical centers. And that's really powered for a long time discoveries that led to drugs like Tagrisso, right? You're right, it's not a straight line. And part of that is because science doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen sort of in a single lab, right? Science happens in an ecosystem. And that ecosystem sort of like, if you think of like the sun of that ecosystem, the thing that powers it and provides that sort of that foundational energy of it, for a long time in the US, that has been public dollars.
But now the Trump administration is slashing that funding. It's already put in place hundreds of millions of dollars in cuts at the National Institutes of Health, the Defense Department, and at universities. And the president's budget has proposed cutting $2.5 billion from the National Cancer Institute. That's 37% of its funding. All of this translates to cuts to research, jobs, labs, and clinical trials. The things that give cancer patients a future.
They begin to lose hope because trials offer, not only do they offer the highest standard of care that you can have by the time you've exhausted standard of care therapies, they also offer the hope that if you get to that point, there will be options available for you because there are researchers and there are scientists and physicians who are working diligently and trying to solve those problems. And when they see that, people are being diverted away from that path, it's very disheartening.
Today on the show, for generations, presidents said they wanted to win the war on cancer. Why does the Trump administration seem determined to lose it? I'm Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around.
This message is brought to you by Apple Card. Did you know Apple Card is designed to help you pay off your balance faster with smart payment suggestions? And because fees don't help you, Apple Card doesn't have any. So if your credit card isn't Apple Card, maybe it should be. Subject to credit approval. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA Salt Lake City branch. Variable APRs range from 18.24% to 28.49% based on creditworthiness. Rates as of July 1st, 2025. Terms and more at applecard.com.
Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Federal funding for cancer research works in two ways. The government funds scientists inside the government at, say, the National Institutes of Health, and it sends billions of dollars in funding to outsiders, so-called extramural researchers.
So these are scientists and faculty members at academic medical institutions and universities who apply for grants from the federal government. In order to get that, you send in your application, and then it goes through something called a study section, which is basically a peer review for your grant proposal. That gets a score. The scored proposals go on to another level of review. It's usually called a council. And the council is the body of experts, sort of often leading experts in the country or the world, who vote basically, and they look at these proposals and they choose which ones are actually going to get funded. At that point, it goes over to the bureaucracy, so the NIH or something, and then they will fund as many projects as they have the money to fund, starting with the highest ranked ones and going down the list.
One of the things that kind of funding mechanism has created is this whole ecosystem of academic research that you're describing. What are the timelines like for that? If you're a principal investigator on some kind of trial or even basic science, I would imagine you are not doing things on a 1-year budget cycle.
Yeah, that's right. So for the grants part of it, you could get your grant, your actual dollars and your notice of award, like maybe a year after you send in the application. So that's about how long it takes to go through the whole process. A lot of the time, people are working on these grants for months before they submit them. It takes a lot of effort to make one of these grant applications. And then if you're thinking about like timelines for like, well, how long does it take to like make a discovery and get that discovery to the clinic? I mean, well, that is an investment for decades, right?
One of the most recent investments was the Cancer Moonshot, announced in 2016 by the Obama administration with $1.8 billion in research funding. President Biden then relaunched the Moonshot with the goal of cutting the age-adjusted cancer death rate by half over 25 years.
The Moonshot was so much more than just money, actually. The Moonshot was really this government-wide collaboration, or a government-facilitated collaboration across the ecosystem of cancer science and cancer medicine. the moonshot brought together experts in the nonprofit world in cancer, and it brought together scientists and industry and agencies in the government to try to solve really key questions in cancer and look for ways that would end cancer as we know it. That was kind of like the thing that people would say. But really the idea was, instead of it being something where, oh my God, you have cancer, you have to go through all this therapy that has toxicity, a lot of people get to stage 4 and they die. But really changing it so that, mortality is halved, I think that was the goal. And, really became this thing that you could catch early, that you had treatment options for, that it was seen as a disease that was treatable, not a disease that was instant, sort of like immediately going to be fatal, right? And something that was never going to be cured for you.
So let's talk about the Trump administration. When the Trump administration was coming into office, what did you start hearing from scientists and clinicians?
So I remember in January, before inauguration, I was at the JPM Healthcare Conference in San Francisco, and I was asking people, the Trump administration's coming in, you were expecting, RFK Jr. to be in charge of HHS, we're expecting, Dr. Oz to be in charge of CMS. And I was asking mostly industry people what they thought. And there was a lot of actually optimism. People were like, no, I think that we feel a lot of optimism for the coming year. We think that, there's going to be investment and the market support for cancer development and of therapies and other things. That kind of quickly changed. I will say also, when I talked to academics, they were much more pessimistic. They were like, I don't know what's going to happen. And cancer advocates also, they had a lot of faith in Congress. Actually, this is always a thing. Even before the election results, I would ask people, like, what do you think about the election? Are you concerned about, what might happen if there's no apparent successor to keeping the cancer moonshot alive? And people always said that cancer has been a bipartisan issue for so long.
Yeah, it's cancer. No one wants to be pro-cancer.
Exactly. No one wants to be pro-cancer. Everybody agrees cancer sucks. And that there's always been this bipartisan support for it. Right? Like Republicans, Democrats, everybody has always felt like this is a worthwhile thing for our country to invest in and a worthwhile industry to promote and help grow, right? And Congress has always been like that. And I think people were really shocked when it appeared like, to quote a source that I have in the cancer advocacy world, that Congress was giving up their power of the purse. That's kind of how he felt, that like Congress had sort of stepped aside and allowed a lot of these cuts and terminations to just roll right through. And people, I talked to people in the cancer advocacy field who had gone and appealed directly to senators and members of the House, really like going to them in person and saying, please do not support this confirmation, or please do not cut this program. And those things happened anyway. So I think people felt a little blindsided by that.
Well, let's take that question of how someone could even inadvertently end up on the pro-cancer side. Why make these cuts? Why defund these programs? What does the Trump administration say is their rationale?
The Trump administration, when you look at their statements, they often say stuff like they want to cut waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. And they claim that American dollars are being wasted, right? When certain research projects are being funded. They often cite these like kind of strange sounding research projects that they say have been funded by the NIH that they're like, why would you ever do this? Like study cats' buttholes or something. Actually, I don't really remember exactly what it was, but they'll sort of say like these dollars are being put towards wasteful, like fraudulent research and has no benefit to the American society. Russ Vought, who's the director of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, he said publicly that he believes the NIH is a bureaucracy that has, quote, been weaponized against the American people. And so they believe that these institutions are dangerous, that they do dangerous things, that they're wasting taxpayer dollars, and that they need to basically reshaped and they need oversight. So that's what they say.
I mean, I think you could take one of Russ Vaught's examples and counter it with the idea that, like, well, why would anyone spend federal dollars researching Gila monster venom. And then, of course, that is well known now to be the study that preceded the discovery of GLP-1 agonists. And voila, you have Ozempic, Wegovy, etc. And so sometimes those wacky sounding studies actually revealed tremendous scientific promise. I guess I wonder, when you look at the rhetoric from the Trump administration, are we able to see how that plays out in specific studies, specific kinds of research that have been targeted, or specific kinds of drugs, populations, et cetera, that may be affected by either funding freezes or employee layoffs?
There's a lot to look at, right? Like, and it's hard to make sense of everything. But I think in the very beginning, and this sort of continues to this day, there are areas of research that are clearly being targeted. So that has anything to do with transgender people, that has anything to do with DEIA, as they call it. But anything to do with DEI, it has to do with like health equity, those kinds of areas that they view as being quote unquote like, now I think this is like a Ted Cruz statement, too woke or too Marxist. I think that word was used once. These are areas that like, were very quickly targeted in the beginning, and you could see on the grant termination letters, signed by Michelle Bowles and other officials, that they quote unquote did not match the administration's priorities, right? They were choosing to terminate those grants based on that. And people could read between the lines and say, yeah, this is because, I study transgender health, like I study DEI, I study health equity. So this is probably why my grant was terminated. But then you can also look elsewhere, right? You can look at like the most recent UCLA example where the like sort of NSF and NIH funding, like sort of, I think it was like hundreds of grants to UCLA were suspended. There's almost no rhyme or reason. It's really across the board. There are grants that are canceled that have to do with theoretical mathematics, and there are grants that have to do with training, like sort of training grants specifically to pay for a graduate student, right, or a postdoc or early career scientist. A lot of those are canceled. A lot of also are ones that, had no clear, obvious DEI component. It was just like, well, we want to study this thing in mathematics, or we want to study this mechanism like in cancer biology, right? So yes, there are areas that seem to be targeted, and the Trump administration will say, yeah, we're targeting those areas. But then there are also these blanket kind of like wide sweeping suspensions of grants that really run across the gamut of topics.
Well, you mentioned UCLA. We have also seen this big funding back and forth fight at Columbia, at Harvard, at these big academic institutions. What does that mean for cancer research? Because a lot of these colleges and universities are also doing basic science.
So if you are a scientist who has had a grant canceled, like an R01, or a grant suspended even, you can't get those funds anymore. As a lab leader, as a principal investigator, those grants support not just the research, they also support the salaries of people who work on that research. And without being able to access those funds, it means they can't pay these salaries. And those individuals will not, they won't have income, right? So I think there's a lot of fear and concern for those people who rely on that quote unquote soft money. And then for the research side of things, it means your research project must stop, right? Like you don't have the funds to actually pay for experiments and lab materials. If you have living experimental materials like lab cultures, like cell cultures, right? Those need to be kept alive. Or the freezer in which cells live, the electricity must be paid for that. And so I think people are left in this really tough bind where they're like, what do we do? And what's been happening is a lot of time the universities themselves will try to step in and say, okay, we'll cover the cost for now. We'll cover the cost of the mouse colonies, so you don't abandon those mice and they die. And just try to keep things alive and just try to hold things where they are. And that's very hard to do for the universities because research is very expensive and they cannot cover it for forever.
Well, that's, I think, one of the questions that then gets asked is, well, wait a minute, can a private foundation step in? Can a wealthy individual step in? Can you have that kind of one-to-one replacement?
No. In short, no. There's an analysis out there that looked at how much private dollars go into research, like how much like philanthropy actually pays for science. In total, every year it's about $5 billion. But the NIH pays like upwards towards like $40 billion for research. And so if you lose like 40% of that, let's just say, because that was the proposal in the president's budget, the White House's sort of skinny budget for next year. If you lose 40% of that, all those philanthropic dollars cannot just meet that gap. But there's another problem, which is that philanthropic dollars also don't fund the same kinds of things. The best example is really the indirect dollars. So the federal dollars pay not just for experiments and scientific research and training. They also pay in a large part for facilities costs and administrative costs. The infrastructure around research that helps keep it running and is needed to actually do that. Like you need a lab to do research, right? And grant dollars don't pay for the lab. Indirect costs pay for that lab. Grant dollars don't pay for electricity. Indirect dollars from the federal government pay for that electricity. It's a crucial important component of how you do research. And philanthropy does not pay for those kinds of things in general. To sum it up, there's not enough philanthropic dollars out there. And two, philanthropy generally works and pays for different things than public dollars.
After the break. So, do all those cancer doctors and researchers just leave the country?
Eczema isn't always obvious, but it's real. And so is the relief from Ebglyss. After an initial dosing phase, about 4 in 10 people taking Ebglyss achieved itch relief and clear or almost clear skin at 16 weeks. And most of those people maintain skin that's still more clear at 1 year with monthly dosing.
Ebglyss, lebrikizumab LBKZ, a 250 milligram per 2 milliliter injection, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults and children 12 years of age and older who weigh at least 88 pounds or 40 kilograms with moderate to severe eczema, also called atopic dermatitis, that is not well controlled with prescription therapies used on the skin or topicals, or who cannot use topical therapies. Ebglyss can be used with or without topical corticosteroids. Don't use if you're allergic to Ebglyss. Allergic reactions can occur that can be severe. Eye problems can occur. Tell your doctor if you have new or worsening eye problems. You should not receive a live vaccine when treated with Ebglyss. Before starting Ebglyss, tell your doctor if you have a parasitic infection.
Searching for real relief? Ask your doctor about Ebglyss and visit ebglyss.lilly.com or call 1-800-LILY-RX or 1-800-545-5979.
This podcast is brought to you by Smalls. Is your cat ready for a diet upgrade? Then you need Smalls cat food, named the best overall cat food by Cats.com. Smalls cat food is packed with protein and made with preservative-free ingredients, giving your cat the high-quality meal they deserve. And it's delivered right to your door. After switching to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported noticeable improvements in their cat's overall health. Plus, Smalls has donated over $1 million worth of food to help cats through Humane World for Animals, so you can feel good about every purchase. The team at Smalls is so confident your cat will love their product, you can try it completely risk-free. Give your cat the food they deserve. For a limited time only, because you are a What Next TBD listener, you can get 60% off your first Smalls order plus free shipping by using code TBD. That's 60% off when you head to smalls.com and use promo code TBD. Again, that's promo code TBD for 60% off your first order plus free shipping at smalls.com.
Ford Blue Cruise hands-free highway driving takes the work out of being behind the wheel, allowing you to relax and reconnect while also staying in control. Enjoy the drive in Blue Cruise-enabled vehicles like the F-150, Explorer, and Mustang Mach-E. Available feature on equipped vehicles. Terms apply. Does not replace safe driving. See Ford.com/BlueCruise for more details.
I want to talk about two consequences here. And the first one is the question of what happens to all of those doctors, postdocs, fellows, labs? Do they just leave the US?
No. So I think this is a big fear. I wouldn't say all, right? Some. And you're talking about sort of this idea that there's going to be a brain drain from the U.S. because, the ecosystem to support science and scientists is in decline because, of the de-investment. And I was just at a lab at Mount Sinai. I spoke briefly with a postdoc there who, originally I wanted to apply for jobs in the U.S. and was saying that he will no longer really be doing that, or even if he applies for jobs in the U.S., he might prioritize a job from from France or the EU. This person is originally from France, and that was entirely driven by what is happening with federal funding in the U.S. I don't think that's going to be the case for everybody. The U.S. continues to have still probably the best research infrastructure in the world. And it continues to have not just like a lot of great universities, but also a lot of great scientists who have built their lives and careers in labs at American universities. And it's very difficult for them to just move their entire lab across the world to Germany or Australia or Japan or China or something, right? And a lot of them are kind of committed to staying here, through thick and thin. But, really the where you'll see the biggest shift is in young people. So the next generation of scientists who are thinking, maybe I won't try to start a lab, or maybe I won't even try to be a scientist, right? I'll find something else to do. And of course, some people will say, I'll move out of the country and look for jobs elsewhere in the world. I actually have a really good friend who's an MD, PhD, and he works in research. But because he has an MD, he can also practice medicine and be a doctor. And I remember when a lot of these things were starting, he said to me, I'm really glad that I've got the MD because I don't have to rely on a career in research. I can be a doctor, right? And I can just treat patients and I can forget about this whole research thing because it doesn't look like there's any point anymore.
My next question about consequences is about patience. I don't want to center myself in this interview, but I do think that my story might be a place where people can sort of access some of this dilemma, or they think about their mom or their dad or their grandparent or themselves or whatever. I'm going to be fine, I hope.
I hope so too.
A version of me, thank you. A version of me 10 years from now. Might they suffer? Might there not be the next Tagrisso? Because some basic lab didn't get funded, or some project didn't get the kind of money that it would have otherwise gotten, and that phenomenal targeted genetic breakthrough didn't happen.
Well, Lizzie, I don't want to scare you, but it doesn't need to be someone like you. It can actually be you, right? Because not all patients will have a long-term remission on Tagrisso.
Yeah, and it might. I'm well aware that my cancer may return.
Yeah, exactly. And so, what is next? I'm thankful that there are options after Tagrisso, and we see options coming through the clinic and coming through that regulatory pathway now. But it's this unknown of what are the scientific breakthroughs and the new therapeutics that we would have had that we will not have because people chose not to dedicate their lives to these problems, right? I think that's a very real concern and a very, very real risk. We don't know, of course, exactly what the future will hold in that regard, but I think we can say that if this keeps up, we will not see the same pipeline of scientists and talent going into this area, and we will not see the same sort of volume of scientific discoveries as we have in the past until, really very recently. But I think people are worried that if the ecosystem of scientific discovery is so disrupted and it continues to be disrupted, we miss an entire generation or an extremely large part of the next generation of scientists and scientist physicians, then all of those that innovation and that discovery that starts in our universities and starts in the academic medical centers, they need to go from that to like the tech transfer office, right? And go out into the industry world and where it can then be developed and optimized and all these other things can happen. But if you cut that off, right, then the flow of innovation to industry also gets cut off. And that will happen in some years if this keeps up, right? That can happen like 10 years, 5 to 10 years maybe. We'll see this drying up of medicine and biomedical innovation that patients in this country rely so much on.
Angus Chen, thank you so much for your reporting and for talking with me about it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Angus Chen is a cancer reporter for STAT. And that is it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell, Patrick Fort, and Shayna Roth. Our show is edited by Paige Osborne. Mia Lobel is the executive producer here at Slate, and TBD is part of the larger What Next family. And if you like what you heard, the number one way to support us is to join Slate Plus. You get all your favorite Slate podcasts, including this one, ad-free, and you'll never hit a paywall on the Slate site. Just head on over to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. All right, we'll be back next week with more episodes. I'm Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks for listening.
I'm Chris Hadfield. I'm an astronaut, an author, a citizen of planet Earth. Join me for a 6-part journey into the systems that power the world. Real conversations with real people who are shaping the future of energy. No politics, no empty talk, just solutions-focused conversations on the challenges we must overcome and the possibilities that lie ahead. This is On Energy.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts.